All right, it is 10 o'clock in Vienna, top of the hour in most other time zones, or on the half hour if you're in some unusual places. India or Newfoundland, I don't know if we have anybody from there. And so welcome to AVTCORE. Not a, that it's a decent number of participants. Let's see. So welcome everybody. We have Bernard as a remote chair, who's here. I am the local chair. If you're, the usual tips, please state your full name before speaking. You can join the in-session Jabber room. If you're here in person, please sign the virtual blue sheets by logging into Metaco. That's also how you can join the mic queue. We will be doing the mic queue entirely via Metaco so as to keep fairness between the remote and local participants. Remote participants, please keep your audio and video off unless you're chairing or presenting. Okay. As mentioned, there's the notes on how to use the Metaco remotely. Video is encouraged but not required, but you have to enable video and audio separately. Here's the general links for things. Hopefully nobody has any issues, but if you do, here's how to do them, report them. Note well, hopefully everybody here has seen this before, but especially because you had to have seen it when you registered, but in general, this is the policies and procedures of the IETF for IPR and consent to recording and code of conduct. In particular, fortunately, we don't seem to have problems with this in this group, but just a reminder to treat everybody professionally and with respect and dignity, and in general, behave like a good person. Okay, about this meeting, agenda, notes. Stefan has volunteered to take notes, but he will not be using the CodeMD because he prefers Microsoft Word, but if anybody wants to take notes in CodeMD, they can. If anybody wants to monitor the Jabber room, that would be appreciated because I might be juggling too many things, but if not, I probably can help with that also. I think Bernard said he would monitor the queue while I do the slides in the Jabber. Is that right, Bernard?
Or presenters can manage their own queue if they can see it.
Right, yeah. By the way, you do have a bit of hum, Bernard, so you might want to, or maybe that's the room, I don't know. We'll see what happens other places. Okay, here's the agenda. Start with a brief discussion of Cryptex, and then skip the 7983 bits, that's the demultiplexing, some STP or RTP over quick, and gaming was over quick. And then I think Cullen had a suggestion for an agenda bash because we have a fair bit of time. Cullen, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just hoping, given there's time at the end, that we could have some discussion around this short, and I didn't say my name, Cullen Jennings, these short tags on that we've been discussing for years. And I think I've got a way of us thinking about this that might really help us get to a decision. I'm not proposing we'd get to a decision today or anything. We'd go do that at the end. So I'd like to put some time at the end if we have for that, for maybe 10 minutes or so.
That should be fine because we have a fair bit of time, as you can see. All right, document status. I'm not positive these have all been published since our last meeting, but we have published them, so that's good. And VP9 is still in misref because of, I think, an indirect reference on frame marking, which is why we've done pubback on frame marking. Cryptex is an IETF last call, but we have a few comments on that. Some issues that came up during last call. I don't know if they were because of last call or just because that's when Richard happened to look at it, but I think we'll have a little bit of discussion of that in a bit. And we've adopted a few other drafts. Just one issue we wanted to raise with everyone. Go ahead.
Yeah, this one came up as part of when I'm doing the write-up. It asks about the IPR declarations and whether the working group has discussed this. I did post an email to the list, and basically what the PubRec requests is that the working group has discussed this and that there aren't objections to proceeding. So I just wanted to point this out and allow anybody who wishes to speak to do so.
Okay, so if anybody has any issues with these IPR declarations on the VPC payload format, please let the working group know. If we hear no objections, we'll assume the working group is fine with that, and we will proceed with request for publication.
Yeah, just to note, so March 8th, we submitted the thing to the list. We haven't gotten any objections. Are there any objections here? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone in the queue. So for the minutes, I think we should record that there were no objections, at least in the meeting.
Okay, good. All right. Okay. And so that's okay. And liaison statements. We'll be talking about the web transport one from W3C in a second. We sent the response to the MPEG green metadata, which I think also got sent to CC to the list. So hopefully
relating to the green metadata, I think Stefan, you noted that there was some kind of update needed to the IETF liaison tracker. Is that right? Did we send it to the wrong place or something? The wrong contact was listed?
I thought this is up to date. It should have been up to date. I mean, Shinzi was gone in 2016, right?
Oh, okay.
And we had liaison traffic before. I don't know where that stale address comes from. Did you use the tracker or how did you send that?
We sent it using the tracker, and it apparently had.
Okay, I will look into it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and here's Bernard. You've been doing this. Do you want to talk to this?
Yeah. So basically, Will Law and Jan Ivar came to IETF112. This was not a formal request; didn't go through the tracker or anything. But in the W3C Web Transport Working Group, they've been creating this API, Web Transport API, based on a bunch of use cases, and they've now discovered that a bunch of the use cases have problems. In fact, most of them have problems. And the reason they have problems is because of congestion, basically lack of support for congestion control and possibly other things. And so what they're looking for is some kind of feedback on what they might do. And it was brought up, I think, by Cullen in the mock buff, which is that one proposal is to have some kind of enum and a constructor that could give some hints about what you want. But they're basically some of the things that are potentially an issue is scenarios where the client is contributing. So that would even be something like video ingestion or maybe an interactive use case where the client is not using low latency congestion control, or perhaps is using BBRE1 and the ProbeRTT is interfering with video ingestion. Anyway, they're trying to figure out if there's some guidance that this working group can give them to help figure it out. And there's two things they're asking here, I guess. Is selectable congestion control advisable? And second of all, measurements, what measurements they could offer. I think these are two distinct things. They've made some progress on the measurement stuff and stats, but the app can't do its own congestion control. That has to be below it. So that doesn't necessarily address the congestion problem. So the question is, what can this working group tell them or advise them to do, or is there some other working group that might be helpful to them? So that's so I did. So next slide, Jonathan. So I did post a message to the list trying to solicit a discussion. Usually the best way in the IETF to solicit a discussion is to post something completely insane, and then people will respond to try to come make something better. My email may not have been stupid enough, so we didn't get any responses. So we thought we'd try to get some people to the mic and make suggestions about what we might do in response to this liaison. Does anybody have any thoughts?
Mo?
Mo Zanotti. We had an entire working group at IETF on this RMCAT, and I think as Lars pointed out yesterday, that not really success coming out of that, as a clear consensus on what techniques or what standards or what protocols to use for media congestion control. I don't think AVT Core is going to be able to come up with anything better than RMCAT came up with over years of work. I think the clear need is known. We know that traditional congestion controls, like TCP-based ones like BBR and Reno-ish things, are not ideal for media. I think everyone knows that a better rate control, a better congestion control for media with feedback to the application about what it's doing, so that application can make intelligent decisions about what media it's selecting and how it's configuring its sources, is definitely needed. But I don't think AVT Core will be able to do anything about it. If RMCAT couldn't, then it's doubtful that we'll be able to do something soon.
Well, that itself, Mo, could be a response, right? Just point them to the RMCAT drafts and basically say something along the lines of what you just said.
I think the practical thing to do for people that care about this is let's try to iterate very fast on what exists. So take BBR v2, see what tweaks you can add to it to make it more media friendly. Take GCC and see what tweaks you can add to make it more combination media and long-lived flow friendly, and see if by implementation we can iterate into something that's usable. Because I don't think standardization and working groups for years has been fruitful.
So question, Mo, would you be willing to volunteer to draft something along the lines of what you just said?
When you say draft, do you mean just an email to a list, or do you mean an actual?
Yeah. Just reply to this email and
Sure.
say, hey,
Sure.
Here's what I recommend saying.
Sure. No problem. And I'd also volunteer to spend energy with anyone that wants to iterate on those current congestion controls to make them more media friendly. We'll definitely invite that too, and I'll add that to wherever we want to collaborate on that. I'll add that to the list.
Colin?
Hi. Yeah. So as a co-chair of our RMCAT, I was going to say roughly what Mo just said. Obviously, we have the RMCAT working group, and it did develop a few RFCs in this space, and there are a couple of congestion control algorithms that have been published as RFCs, and some which have been discussed and not published as RFCs. And as far as I am aware, they all work, and they seem to work reasonably well. That they haven't got uptake for various reasons. In terms of information we need to provide, we did do RFC 8888 on congestion control feedback. If you can supply that sort of information, if Web Transport can supply that sort of information, that would be useful, and probably gives the sort of information that's needed to do the congestion control feedback. And I'd also remind people that with my other hat on, that the IETF has the congestion control research group if people want advice on algorithms.
So, Colin, if you could also respond to the list with some ideas on what we might say, that would also be helpful.
So totally 100% agree with what Colin and Mo just said. I think I'd like to add into this. I think as an overall area thing, we should be looking at I mean, imagine the use case of a browser that implements web transports, and some days the JavaScript is doing media over the web transport, and some days it's doing file transfer or something more like that. I think that we need to start specifying ways of putting the hints down. I know there's a common perception that we don't do APIs at IETF, but I don't think that's really true. I think we do, and we can, and that we should. I mean, I'm not saying we define what the API exactly looks like, but we just sort of, say like, look, we need an API that allows you to signal the type of following information up and down this stack of all these things as passes through, and that we start working on. I would be, I've been playing with congestion control algorithms for media based on BBR v2 and have implementations. I mean, it'd be very interesting to we need to get some progress on this for media. Now, all of that said, I want to back up and 180 degrees the other direction. I think it's also probably worth reminding these people, people have run media over TCP for years and it works fine, right? At some level of fine. So there is some definite, there's some scale here. This is going to work better. Whatever they're doing with nothing is going to work better than TCP. And less well, perhaps, than some of the UDP algorithms. But I think that the problem, we have to fix this as congestion control algorithms. Thanks.
Suas?
Yep, I think I agree with most of the things that said by both Cullen, Mo, and Colin. So only thing I would like to add is that looking at IETF as a body and responding to W3C, and also given that there is definitely a need for something like this from multiple sides, like the mock, for example, or the web transport W3C guys, they needing something like this. Would it make sense to, as an IETF responding to W3C, but we make a joint request across this multiple workforce to quick working group with a kind of a request saying that proposal saying that this needs to be worked on, and basically get quick working group more involved, given that there are multiple places where this is needed. And also, having said that, and also on the API and the feedback from the quick transport to the W3 to the web transport and also W3C, we definitely need a kind of northbound APIs that needs to be, that kind of exposes what and RMCAT app interaction feedback kind of pointer, like the API endpoint API that was exposed into the application, so that in application, if not can't fix the congestion control algorithm, but it can react on how the congestion control algorithm is doing, which is not exposed into the web transport today. So probably there are a couple of things at the API level with what exists today and expose that. And second thing is that we work towards, as an IETF, to help this W3C and other guys to make a formal request to the quick working group and what are the working group to work to solve this problem. And I'd like to volunteer if we proceed on this as well. Thanks.
So the quick working group has pointed out that they don't handle congestion control, that's done
Sure.
Other places. So I don't think bringing quick into this, they basically said, hey, we, just use some other congestion control. So a congestion control group would probably be more appropriate, as was pointed out.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Anyway, I think we're done with this.
Yeah, I would just say, as an individual, I'm wondering if it might be worthwhile to, bring up to the RMCAT group using RMCAT algorithms with Quick or something, just as a discussion. I don't know what's going to be how much traction that's going to get, but just, maybe just a guidance on the existing RMCAT algorithms, how you'd use them with Quick and which Quick extensions you need might be useful.
Just for the notes, Mo is taking the pen and drafting up something with the help of all these people here, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So next is Cryptex, and I think Richard, are you speaking to this? Richard, are you?
I had some things on the one issue about encryption and structure, but I don't know if Sergio had other things to say at the time. What's the next slide?
think I may have given you slide control, but let's see. Yeah, I gave you slide control, Richard.
Fascinating. I'm not sure I see that.
Okay.
I need to
Let's see. Hold on.
share a slide.
Hold on. Let me see. Let me take it back. Does that take it back from me?
Okay.
Not quite sure. Let's see. Let me try. Okay, I'm clicking past slide control. No, hold on. I think something weird has happened. Sergio, I might have to stop and restart the presentation. What's happened here?
So I just sent you a request to share slides. Maybe if you grant that, I can just share the deck.
Let's see.
One thing I learned is you have to take your time. This thing is not fast.
Yeah. Okay, I'm still seeing the slides. I don't know how to stop sharing the slides.
Well, I can just ask you to flip them.
No, I think I have lost control of the slides.
Oh, good.
I'm reloading myself to see if that helps. Oh, now I'm not reloading at all. I'm just timing out.
If there's someone with chair privileges, I've sent a slide request, and I'm happy to just.
Do you want me to try to load them, Jonathan, or?
So do we still see this? So I still see the slides here, but I'm not sure
Yeah.
who's actually sharing them. So I'm not sure how we revoke that.
I am seeing them. It says Jonathan Lennox's slides.
No, it says Renan Krishna. How did that happen? Did I click on the wrong person? There we go. Okay. All right, let's try this again. Share preloaded slides. Oh, wait, hold on. Share preloaded slides. Share. You're on there. Okay.
15.
I'll just drive them. That's probably easier.
Yeah. Okay. So Sergio, did you want to talk to these first slides?
Sergio, we don't hear you.
Now you should hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. So we have addressed all the reviews or the feedback that were raised in the review, and we have also added the contact name and the email address for the IANA registration, and submitted a new draft fixing these issues. I think that it has already been reviewed and agreed that all the feedback has been already addressed. So the only outstanding issue is the one feedback that Richard raised in the GitHub repository, that it is the next slide. Yep. So Richard, you want to comment on this?
Sure. Yeah, I can comment on this. I just kind of randomly came along and reviewed this. I didn't see the last call announcements or anything. What I noticed is there's some ambiguity in how this document defines encryption, and I think it's a little bit clearer on the next slides. Jonathan, if you could go forward. Yeah. So Cryptex wants to do this kind of I call it punctured encryption, where you don't encrypt the header of the extension data, the RFC 8285. I forget what the exact number is, but the standard format for the RTP extension. And the problem on the next slide is, if you think about encryption, how encryption works, like we got these two encryption frameworks that are universally used. AEAD takes unitary byte strings for AAD authenticated data and plain text, and of course produces ciphertext. Right, so you can't do puncturing there. So you need to provide a unitary plain text for it, a contiguous plain text. And if you're going to use the other interface we have is this stream cipher plus MAC construct. And in that case, you can skip around, but you need to tell it, whether you're skipping or whether you're considering the two blocks of input to be contiguous. Next slide, please. So we kind of need to decide like how we're going to, the spec before didn't specify clearly kind of what the input was to the ciphers in these two cases. So in the EAD case, we need the contiguous plain text. In the stream cipher case, we need to know, like, are we skipping over some of the key stream, or are we just, applying the key stream to different spots? So we kind of explored two options in this pull request. Next slide. The first option was to do it kind of AEAD style, where you would basically undo the puncture to create contiguous authenticated data in plain text. You'd run that through the cipher, and then you'd undo it. Like, you don't have to do it this way. You could do it with multi-part inputs to your cipher, but logically it would kind of look like this. I'll forward a bit, and this is kind of where the option we ended up liking a little better, because it is focused on AEAD, which is the way we hope that things are trending to go in the future. Kind of universally AEAD everywhere. The main drawback is that it requires this swapping operation if you're doing things in place, or it requires a more complicated interface to the AEAD. But anyway, this is the kind of the first option to swap things to make the inputs contiguous. Next slide, please. Yeah, the other option is to do this kind of in-place stream-like authentication with, clarifying that you skip the chunk of the key stream that corresponds to the extension header. The downside to this one is that you end up locked into the stream cipher plus HMAC framework, which we already are for header encryption, but this would extend it to the whole packet and be kind of a downer. So next slide. The proposal here we landed on in the PR is to focus on this AEAD-like option, where you synthesize the contiguous authenticated data in plain text, under the reasoning that we should focus on AEAD, and it's not that bad to do to mem copy the CSRCs around to get the encryption done. So that's the summary. Sergio kindly put together a PR, which I think is in a landable state right now. So I think we should be ready to go here in terms of solution, but we wanted to present this here at the meeting in case folks had thoughts, concerns, objections, etc.
Colin, see you in the queue, and I'll get in as an individual.
Colin, so I mean, first of all, let me just start with, 100% proposal one, let's option one, let's do this. But this was discussed immensely before we even adopted this document, went on and on forever. And we came to this conclusion that the mem copy was not an expense. And in fact, if you structured the way in your library that you stored the data correctly, you didn't even need to do it. But no one's going to really do that. The mem copy is cheap. And that we were definitely fine with being just AEAD. And I thought there was an IETF document that said all future work should be AEAD, but I can't find it now that I said that. And I'm sorry, I sent an email to the list last night, but I realized I didn't send it to you, Richard, so my apologies. But I mean, I think that this has been the intention from all along, so I don't think there should be huge controversy about this.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Jonathan Lennox is an individual. This is how I implemented it when I did the test vectors. So I think it was what we were always intending, and I guess it's basically what Richard found is that we didn't explain it well in the document. So this is basically just editorial improvements, which is great.
Cool.
Suas?
Just a thought here. I support option one as well. But on the point that Cullen made, if there is no such document that AEAD is the future, should we be asking to have such a document to avoid confusions like this in the future?
I don't think such a broad scope of statement is in the scope of this working group. If
Right.
the IETF in general wants to do that, that should come out of the security area, I hope.
I mean, I think in general, this means that all encryption should be AEAD is pretty well established, at least in the security community. I'm not sure of the statement anywhere.
Yeah,
really
I don't know
needed.
if there's a document to that effect or just, common knowledge, but sounds like maybe that's something to take to SAG or something if it doesn't actually exist, just so that the rest of the community knows it. All right. Next up is Skip, which I think, Daniel, are you presenting this?
This is
Yeah.
Mike Fowler. Dan is online too. Both of us will be presenting.
Okay, great.
We'll start with the next slide. This is just a slide we keep in place to keep track of background, where we come from, and that we have deployed devices in the SCIP and the US and NATO community that are presently using the protocol we have written a draft RFC for. The problem statement is more along the line, the third bullet, that the most commercial network administrators and security personnel are not aware of SCIP and can result in the SCIP media subtype being removed from an SDP, which is disastrous to us. We'll move on to the last bullet. The SCIP RFC was accepted as AVT core work item in January. Comments received have been reviewed and incorporated into a new draft of this RFC. Next slide. And this is what we're looking at. 2 media subtypes, audio SCIP and video SCIP, have been registered with IANA as an RTP media format media types. The RFC is needed to provide additional information for those media subtypes, the header fields, payload format fields, as well as serve as a general awareness of that SCIP is out there. An example of the mapping is shown there with the audio stream and the video stream. Next slide. The call for adoption. Dan, you want to take this?
Sure. We had the call for adoption back in January.
Daniel, your audio is kind of low. Do you want to?
Oh, we'll try that again. Is that better?
That's better.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we had the call for adoption back in January. During the interim meeting a month ago, we had some comments that were brought in to discuss what to change. So we went ahead and made those changes. Specifically, section 4.1, we changed a should to a shall. Again, that was legacy text to support, text to some of the very early adopters of the SCIP in our version of internal version, if you will, of the SVP. Didn't quite do it exactly the way we had specified it, but we certainly, again, we control the SCIP protocol in our own SCIP working group, so we can certainly make those changes ourselves to bring those others up to date. There's also a comment regarding whether or not to repacketize SCIP. We basically said no, because SCIP is not really SCIP is a real-time protocol, audio and video, so it doesn't really make sense to repacketize it, save it as a stream, but replay it later. Also, because it's encrypted, so we added a sentence to stipulate not to repacketize SCIP. We also updated the section about the marker bit, basically saying it's going to be always zero for discontinuous traffic, and marker bit will be set during continuous traffic based on the underlying media. Again, because during the continuous traffic, we're basically carrying other codecs, other registered codecs like MELC and G729B, things like that, that already define how to use the marker bit. So we chose to allow that to be controlled by those codecs themselves. Next slide. For sections 5.1 and 5.2 that are basically a repeat of the IANA registration. Again, we specified NA because there's no previous versions of the SCIP media subtype, so that's the reason why we chose that and left that in there at this point. So, and again, finally, for sections 8.1 and 8.2, we moved the SCIP 214.2 and SCIP 210 references from the normative section to the informational section. And finally, we renamed and resubmitted the draft with the new name. So that's where we are with that. The next slide. I don't know if Mike, you want to go back to talking about this or these issues, or?
Sure, I'll take that.
We're here because issues have occurred between OEMs and of network equipment, network administrators, security personnel who are unaware of SCIP and the SDP contents necessary to establish our secure session. So the SCIP RFC is a globally accessible information as to how to handle this. The comments we've received from the AVT Core call for adoption period have been reviewed. Since then, no new comments have been received. So the question really is, we'll handle questions from you guys, and then we need to know what our next step is.
Bernard, is he in the queue?
I think the document is pretty clear about what needs to be done in the case of audio. Basically, don't mess with the payloads, and hopefully your SBCs will accept the SCIP audio type. I have a lot of questions though relating to the video use cases. Like, is SCIP going to be used for video conferencing, kind of in an end-to-end encryption scenario? What are kind of the video use cases? Because in the case of video, as we've been talking about with end-to-end encryption, there could be quite a few other considerations relating to, forwarding headers and all kinds of stuff.
I think the best way to look at the video stream is actually quite similar to how we handle audio. The SDP is simply meant to establish a channel by which the traffic stream will occur. There's once that setting up a secure trunk, if you want to call it that, between two endpoints. The handling of the actual parameters of the video as well as the audio stream too, they are handled by the negotiation that will occur across that link. So to the networking world, and that type of information is handled elsewhere within the SCIP standards. To the networking world, what they're going to see is the SDP, and they're going to see traffic. There will be marker bit. It'll be framed according to the IETF standards. So, for instance, if it's a video stream, we're doing a secure end-to-end application layer conference using H.264. That will be negotiated within the framework of that SDP. And to anyone looking at that traffic stream, they will not be able to see what that negotiation looks like.
It's just point to point like H.264, or is it conferencing?
That's left to our vendor community how they wish to implement across that link.
But it's always H.264 ABC. There's no temporal scale. There's no scalability or anything like that. It's just
again, to some degree, that'll be left to the vendor how they choose what protocol they use to run and negotiate within a secure channel. And to the network, it's gonna look like encrypted traffic. So we believe it'll be H.264. We believe in time there'll be perhaps more about how they handle the conferencing within these channels. They may be more than one, but at least for now, that's the approach, is that we consider it'll be H.264.
Stefan?
Yeah, so did I understand that correctly, that you have some basically in-band negotiation stuff going on there? And if yes, the documents that describe that, assuming these are SCIP documents, are these the ones that are in the normative reference and that I can read upon request?
They are the ones that'll be in the normative reference that you can request. And remember that all that will be seen in the network will be just bits. It'll be the encryption stream will be established, and then there'll be some negotiation. For instance, going back to audio, will it be MELP, or will it be 729, or will it be even a proprietary solution for voice or for video?
I think I get it. I'm just interested how this is supposed to work, because this is kind of an unusual way how RTP is employed, right? It's a little bit following the old, let's throw some MPEG-4 frame stuff there, and everything is hidden in that. Yeah, this actually seems to be doing it even a little bit more. I'm just interested how this can work, and but if these documents can be made available, then I'm read them, and yeah.
Yeah, there actually are two deployed products that use video.
Right. The encryption is that it's more of an application layer. So I mean, it's not within the RTP packet itself. It's really the payload is, for example, like the Multiplexing payload is encapsulated, if you will, that goes with it. So it's not an RTP layer encryption like the previous slide was talking about. It's the actual payload itself with MELC or 729, for example, for audio, or even for the H.264 for video. It's the payload is what is encrypted. So the header would look the same as it would for the native codeout.
So Cullen is saying something in the chat room that might be relevant to folks. He's saying, as far as I can tell, the conferences are all MCU transcode style conferences. So they're not, the conferencing is apparently not being done using a selective forwarding unit, which would need some header info to decide what to drop. I don't know, Cullen, you want to say anything else?
Yeah, sure. I mean, basically, what I want to say is, like, let's say they've brought us a completely black box thing that says we want to move some data over it. We're not even going to tell you whether it's a video or audio codec or whether it transcodes holograms. It'd be perfectly fine for us to approve this document with no clue of what's inside that black box. We're talking here about just moving it. So I don't really see the problem with this document. Like this has been done for a long time. It's widely deployable. There's no problem with it. It meets the use cases people have for it, but it's the part that we're reviewing of it is really just the registration of the payload type. We don't really care what's inside there. So I think the whole thing's fine, regardless of what it does. That said, I mean, I think that probably over the long term, like maybe they would change to do things in a different way, but I think it works for their conferencing use cases, so I don't see a problem.
Sorry, I just lost the slides. Okay, here we go. Yeah. Stefan, are you still in the queue, or is that lingering?
Apologies.
Okay, no worries. Ted, did you want to mention the thing you said in the chat, or are you? Is that?
Ted Hardy speaking. So I think what I was putting in the chat is more procedural, and I think what Marie and I were talking about is that just like you have a downref called out in a last call, when this does go to last call, and I assume the next step here is working group last call followed by IETF last call.
Yeah.
When it does go to last call, that calling out that the documents are probably not going to be available is the right thing to do, because then anybody who reads the last call goes in and evaluates it on the terms that Cullen just laid out, knowing that it's going to be treated like a black box.
Okay.
I will say I did try and request the documents back in November, and I never got anything back. It's possible that requesting them does work for some set of circumstances, and I just didn't fit in them, or possibly I'm just in their spam traps for whatever other reason. But I think we should just treat it as a black box, call it out in the last call as unavailable, and leave it at that.
Okay. All right. So, Richard?
Just a quick note here that the IANA registrations for these media types published specifications. So if specifications are not in fact available, I wonder if there's some action to take with IANA here.
Could you repeat that? Your little broke up a little bit during your.
To whom did you mean to?
You're addressing that question too. Sorry.
Sorry, that was me. I can try that again. So I'm just a bit concerned about Ted's comment about the specifications not being available, given that IANA registration of these media types lists the specifications as published. Now we can quibble about what it means to be published, but I think being available to folks on the internet is generally the definition that people use. But Colin, I think you might have insights here.
So I'm not looking at the draft, but I actually recommend. I mean, my understanding of, let's ignore this draft amendment. Let's just talk about IPR declarations on these types of documents. My understanding is that to discuss sending a media type over RTP, you do not actually need a normative reference to the codec, okay, or any information inside of it. And that's very important for our IPR declarations in some ways. And that you can have an informational reference to it. So I don't even think this is a downref in last call, as long as it was an informational reference. I sent the suggestion to the list long ago that perhaps it should be an informational reference. I don't know if that happened or not, but
It
exactly.
did, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, we're done. It's not even a downref.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to delay this document. I just meant to note that in parallel to this discussion that there may be an IANA question.
Yeah,
I'll
okay.
send some notes in the chat.
Yep.
So again, for the notes, I think the conclusion of this discussion is that the normative references to the skip documents that are there at the moment, which say something, here's a reference, and if you want to get the document, talk to these people, and Ted did that and didn't get a reply for 4 months, that these documents probably should just go into the informative reference.
I believe that's already been done.
Section, is it?
Yeah, according to this slide it has. So.
Second?
Yes.
According to the second bullet on this slide.
Okay,
yeah.
Good. Thank you. So I don't need to note anything there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ted Hardy. So I think I have confused the matter by using the term downref, and I apologize. I did not mean to imply that this was exactly the same as a downref. I do think spec unavailability is something that we need to call out. I don't think it's blocking, as Cullen pointed out. This isn't something that we have to have, but if the specs are in there and not available, it's just polite to the community as we ask them to review it to let them know that they're likely not going to be available.
So that's basically just a note to the whoever's doing the write up, the diagram chapter. Okay.
Right. Well, it's not that the specs are unavailable; they're available on request, if you will.
No.
Again, they're controlled by our NATO skip working group. So, in most cases, I'm sure they'd be fine if you reached out to them to request them. They should be able to provide those to you.
Ted Hardy, thank you for clarifying that, but when I tried, it didn't work. So perhaps you could send to AVT Core exactly how to construct such a request, because when I sent it to the listed email address requesting the name of the document and explaining I wanted it to review in the context of this document, I got nothing back. So, I mean, not even a thank you, but no, nothing. So if you would like to give us the procedure for requesting it, that would be a different way of handling this exact problem. Thanks.
Okay, we'll look into that. Thank you.
Okay, so for our next step, it sounds like, while, there's some issues with, people wanting the documents to review them, doesn't sound like there are any remaining open issues as far as I know. So perhaps this is ready for working group last call. Bernard, do you think so?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I think, Bernard and I will figure out who's going to be the shepherd on that. And we'll do the next step.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so Bernard, I guess, are you presenting this next one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is little update on RFC 7983 BIS. Next slide. So just to remind people what this is about, it's an update to RFC 7983 Section 7, documenting quick multiplexing. So it's a description of how to multiplex SRTP, SRTCP, stun, turn, DTLS, ZRTP, and quick. And then also a little bit of guidance on handling overlap between quick and turn channels. That's something that's not an issue in WebRTC. And it also updates the DTLS content type field IANA page to reference a new RFC. There's no other change needed. So one caveat here is that this applies to Quick version 1. It is not guaranteed to work in future versions of Quick. So next slide. So the document has been updated in version 02. So some of the changes from version 01. I did add some text about the multiplexing scenarios that this can be used for, and there are really, I think, two main ones. One is where we use Quick primarily for data exchange and are continuing to use RTP and RTCP for the media with DTLS SRTP key management. And just to clarify some of the discussions we had, this scenario doesn't require any replacement or changes to Quick congestion control. It's just using it as data. And so that's where you need the maximum multiplexing. And the second scenario would be the RTP over Quick scenario. And that is where you're not using RTP and RTCP, so you don't have to multiplex that, but you still have to multiplex with stun and turn. So the document covers both of these scenarios, but the second one has less stringent requirements than the first one. So we clarified that. The second thing is that many of the documents that this depended on have now reached RFC status. So we've had an update to stun, an update to turn. Quick transport is now an RFC, as is Quick TLS. So basically, at this point, all normative references are now published as RFCs. There's no normative references to drafts. So question is, are we ready for a working group last call? Kind of where, what do we need to do to move forward?
Yeah, personally, I would say it sounds like we are. Seeing nodding in the room. So yeah, it sounds like, and since Bernard's an author on that, probably I should do a working group last call, which I'll do sometime after everybody's home and over their jet lag. That's true. Do it before. Magnus, did you have something to say?
Magnus Westlund. Bernard, have you looked at what happens with Quick v2?
We have had discussions, which is that in Quick v2, as it says here, they're not required to be compatible with this. I mean, that's kind of something that the Quick Working Group has said. So I don't know that if you're asking whether it's specifically broken with Quick v2, I think we'd have to do an analysis. But do we know enough about Quick v2 to do that right now?
I would think so. I mean, my impression is Quick v2 is quite along the way on the road to. Yeah, so it's. I think you can definitely look and analyze it and to see if what happens at least. So.
Okay.
Procedurally, my only question would be, do we want to have a normative reference on that if it's not coming for a while?
Yeah, but okay, I would suggest just looking at it to see what there and then follow up, because it isn't that far off, I think, from actually making progress. So okay. It's in Quick Working Group. Quick v2 is the same as v1, except it's flipping some of the bits, etc. So it's basically creating some of this issue here, etc. But it's intended to have something for Quick to use the version negotiation, etc., and exercise some of these mechanisms. So. Yeah.
Ted Hardy speaking. Yeah, it's supposed to be completely compatible with V1. The whole point of it is greasing to make sure that middle boxes don't start seeking for specific bit patterns that are only going to be part of V1. So it should be very fast. I mean, I think we're not expecting it to take a year from now. So I think the point Lucas made in the chat is probably the right one, that this should take into account the fact that Quick will grease some of these things, and it will have multiple versions, some of which will be compatible and some not. But from the purposes of the multiplexing scenario, the critical bit is probably that the greasing will change the bit patterns.
Well, I mean, there's all, yeah. We'll take a look at it, but you know, we've had discussion with a Quick working group that said that they weren't necessarily going to commit to making version 2 compatible.
Ted Hardy speaking. Whether they committed it in the past, it will be. There's a link in the data to the data tracker in the chat that you can follow. This particular time, what we're using V2 for is to grease these things, and therefore it will be compatible.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Colin?
Hi, so by Quick V2, you mean Martin Duke's draft? Because if so, as far as I can tell, it's compatible. It's the
okay, great.
Draft, which is more of an issue, as far as I can see.
Okay, and I'm actually in the line to relay specifically for Lucas. I think Lucas, the actual issue Lucas was raising is this draft, which for somebody they're greasing the quick bit specifically. If you look at the chat, he's linked to the reference for that, which I think. I mean, my suspicion would be that for 7983, you have to say you're using that for demuxing, so don't negotiate this extension if you're demuxing. But I think we probably need to explicitly say that.
Okay. Yeah, you could put that in the minutes. That would be great. Yeah, I mean, the problem is that one of the concerns of the Quick working group was, you know, is this document an agreement that constrains them in some way? And I think the general thought was no, but you know, one could put in advice like that. The question is whether that would create a normative reference on Quick V2. So,
well, I think specifically on quick bit grease, which is hopefully
okay, yeah. Just the bit grease, yeah,
probably. But we should look at V2 to tell us to just in general. Cullen?
So, I mean, you know, the purpose of greasing is to meet certain needs, and you can go read the whole program, EDM program, and everything else on it. But it isn't just to try and make things broken in the internet, right? So I don't think they're going to do some piece of greasing that's deliberately just breaks things that are happening. So I think we could discuss with them. But I think this whole point just raises the point that really we're going the wrong direction on this. I think we ought to move it to a BCP, and then it will constrain all the protocols that do it. And we should allocate a range of bits for each protocol and say that that's how it is across those protocols. And that would constrain them. And we wouldn't be having this discussion. So that's my 2 cents. Yeah,
my personal viewpoint is aligned with yours, Cullen. But it might be, so that might be an appropriate thing to do. But I'd like to hear what others think.
Colin?
My impression is that that may or may not be a good thing to do, but I would be surprised if the Quick working group would go along with it. And I think perhaps better guidance for this draft might be to say that this works with current versions of Quick, but be very clear that it's likely to break in future.
I mean, what it says at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, presumably, you know, they're not going to
possibly strengthen a little from what it says at the moment.
I mean, Quick V1 presumably is not going away, so you can keep using Quick V1 if that's what you need to use. So, I mean, after all that, I mean, I guess it sounds like we do want to add that reference to the bit grease to say, you know, if you're demultiplexing, don't negotiate it. So probably I'd suggest do a rev with that. Take a look at V2, see if there's anything that needs to be said. See if we can reference it as informative, informational rather, just to avoid too much in the way of reference dependencies. But we probably will need to normatively reference bit grease in the don't do this. And then I'd say working with last call after we've got that. Anybody object to that?
Yes, if you can get that in the minutes, that would be great.
Okay. Stefan nods, so that sounds like we do. All right, I think that's it for this. So next up is Spencer. Okay, looks like Medico's recording the camera, so that's good.
Thank you. So I'm Spencer Dawkins, talking about so many issues for SDP for RTP over QUIC. Next slide, please. So what I thought I was doing was basically SDP for a drop-in replacement for SRTP, since QUIC is encrypted. And what I was actually doing was trying to keep track of questions about RTP over QUIC and about media over QUIC at sub-level, because many of these questions might impact SDP. And I was keeping that list in at least 3 different places because of various reasons. So what I have done was create a new GitHub that combined all the issues from the various places where I had written things down. And so I'm going to hold off on updating my individual draft for now, but basically collect those questions as GitHub issues. And I've already seen someone attending the meeting from not here who put in at least one new issue about 2 a.m. my time. So people are starting to do that. And then I'll be working on answers and updating the SDP draft. If I could get the next slide, please. So some of these may be issues may be tied to non-traditional RTP use cases. If you think about it, RTC Web RTC by reference, and the media over QUIC buff that happened yesterday morning by reference. But I'm tracking those issues. I'm sorry?
2 days ago.
It's later than I think. I'm tracking those issues anyway, basically just in case we want to have RTP using QUIC like other media transport protocols do. Next slide, please. This is the slide that you all saw at the interim. And I just wanted to say that there's 3 in there that are in italics, 5, 6, and 7 and these are actually still in the GitHub for the draft because they were pretty clear and I know what to do. But all the other numbers are new, pointing to the issues. GitHub. Next slide, please. I had new exciting issues from Bernard in one of the places, and we can kind of talk about we could talk about any of these during the meeting that seem helpful, but just like I say, I wanted to be sure that you all saw that that was happening because my personal GitHub isn't really tied to AVTCORE mailing list, nor should it be. And next slide, please. I had some issues that were I had several issues in the text of the SDP draft before I started putting in additional issues there. Most of those had actually ended up in the draft itself. or sorry, it ended up as issues in GitHub itself, but there were a couple of these that were not. And next slide, please. So I did have some issues that I'd like feedback on, either here or on the mailing list is fine. And these three here, whether double encryption matters, or distinguishing between mappings onto streams and onto datagrams, and quick connection management in case of path failure. Next slide, please. This is why I would like for feedback from the group, which was the initial draft defined two secure AV profiles. And that was a great plan because you could ignore the secure AV protocol part of that going over quick because it was encrypted, and more stuff was encrypted than SRTP would have encrypted anyway. But to use that as a hint for middle boxes to forward over unencrypted protocols. So if you hit RTP on the other side of a middle box, the middle box would not have to guess whether you wanted it to be secure. It could just say, you know, it came in as SAVP, so I'm going to send it out as SAVP over RTP over UDP. And I got a comment that said, this is silly, and I believe them. Yeah, basically just define AVP and AVPF and tell the truth. Again, quick encrypts more than SRTP anyway. That we should be using explicit signaling to tell middle boxes how to forward things that they receive over RTP over quick. And I implemented that as PR9, which is not merged in GitHub because I got another comment after I did that that said, not so fast. What about apps that are using the secure AV protocols, AV profiles now? And so that's kind of, like I said, that's kind of where that discussion is headed. But rather than going back and forth every time I talk, you know, it's like changing the draft every time I talk to somebody. That if I'm seeing discussions that have not converged yet, I think it's fair to ask the working group what the right thing to do is.
Colin, I see Colin Perkins in the queue.
Colin. Oh, I should turn slightly to face the queue. Hi, Colin.
Hello. I was mostly putting myself in the queue for when you finished. So if you've not finished, then carry on and finish.
No, I think the next slide is basically me finishing,
Yeah.
and so I can come to that one later, and we can talk now.
Okay. I'm just reading your next slide here. Yeah. But I think the point you're making with the double encryption and so on, I think sort of hints at some of the issues I was going to raise, which is that it's I'm increasingly unconvinced that it necessarily makes sense to run RTP over quick. I think it makes a lot of sense to run to use RTP payload formats and media types, perhaps over quick.
Sure.
But once you start looking at the rest of RTP, you know, the transport doesn't fit well, the congestion control doesn't fit well, the whole RTCP framework doesn't fit well, SRTP doesn't fit well, the sequence numbers, the SSRCs, you know, there's not a whole lot left of RTP other than the payload formats that makes sense. So I wonder if maybe that rather than trying to fit RTP over quick, we should maybe be saying, look, this doesn't make sense, but here are the bits that do make sense, and maybe you need to define a different protocol that reuses payload formats, for example, over quick, and then it's trivial to gateway.
Thank you, Colin. Suhas?
Spencer, thanks for the work. I did respond to a couple of issues on the GitHub, and coming to kind of I agree Colin in a way because while responding to issues and that especially the profiles that end with F feedback and having RTCP there, it is not very clear on how this all fit in the quick framework, and at the same time, for the ones that are starting with a secure kind of thing where it's a hop by hop between the client and the server, and the SRTP kind of the encryption ends right there, and their quick was already providing the needed transport layer security right there, and hence having the S did not make much, was not adding more security per se value. So I do feel if we are taking some getting the RTP and STP over quick, we need to kind of think about some of those points like Colin mentioned, like what are we trying to do it, and STP kind of naturally unfolds on how it gets used, but there's something we definitely have to think about a bit, and we need to provide some guidance on what we need to do here.
Thank you. Totally agree. Thank you. Bernard.
Yeah, I would point out that as we're hearing, it is possible to experiment with a lot of this stuff because we have some basic code and APIs out there to actually build these systems. And in particular on the web, it's a little bit constrained because we do have web codecs, which allows you to get the to encode and decode frames and then basically send them over either web transport or RTC data channel. So you can actually build some of this stuff, and it is actually being done in commercial applications. I would actually note that this stuff is actually quite real. At least at the moment, it's mostly being done with containerized media, but people want to get away from that because it's basically if you don't need content protection, it's just a bunch of overhead. So people want a way of transporting these frames, and what I've seen so far is that they have been using something pretty close to RTP. So a lot of the fields are there. The RTCP is usually done quite differently, but in practice, I guess to what Colin is saying, many parts of it are taken out, but you do need kind of sequence numbers and timestamps and stuff like that, and and things like that.
Someone in the room just flinched.
So Magnus Westlund, yeah, I mean on the higher levels of saying here, I think the only reason for having double encryption is if you have a middle box that are forwarding it without changing anything. So if you have EKT, for example, and try to do not touch really at all the key, just forwarding the packets, that's I think is the only one which would be, and that I think in that case you should negotiate SAVPF. Otherwise, if you're not encrypting the internal, just send it as AVPF if you're going to have RTP directly on quick. But I mean, this is back to I think your original question is what the hell is RTP over quick? Do you need to answer that question first, or what's these things? It might be several answers.
I may be changing the title on an issue in the issue tracker. What the hell is?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
cool. Thank you, Magnus. And Colin.
So partially, I really resonate with Colin. I think this is a very challenging path that's not clear the value of the end goal of, but I think we sailed past that bridge. We agreed to do this long ago. So at this point, I want to help you figure out how to get it done, not just tell you you shouldn't do it. And thank you. I'm sending you big hugs for having taken this on. It's not easy. But that said, I back up. I think your easiest path here is, though it sounds silly to do double encryption, and actually, if you were doing it over a turn connection that did, HTTPS, it would be triple encryption. I think you should just do that. That's what it's signaled. It's the easiest to understand. It's going to be by far the easiest to do. And there's multiple cases where you actually might want this. There's lots of people who, more in defense sort of type environments, who like the idea of double encryption because if one of them's compromised, hopefully the other one might be different. Like you might use RSA in one and EC in the outer or whatever. There are times where you can improve your security by doing it twice. There's also Cisco makes some products where we do what we call throwaway encryption, where the outer layer is TLS encrypted, but we know that the middle boxes will man in middle of that TLS. So we encrypt the stuff inside that again in a way they can't decrypt. So look, it's not unimaginable that there are use cases for double encryption. It's semantically what everything means, and you're going to have a very hard time redefining everything to semantically mean not double encryption in this case over quick. So I wouldn't do it. I just, like, if people signal that, they get double encryption. That's what they asked for. Have a nice day.
Cool. And so I can update the issue to explain that, and that's probably adding things in security considerations in the actual SDP draft and things like that. So cool. Thank you.
And I mean, I think I'd say, like, this might seem silly, but trust me, the alternative is not a path we're going to go down.
Well, silly for me is wandering back and forth between between registering it and not registering it, you know, at a cycle time of one IETF meeting. Let's step up.
So maybe, Stefan Wenger, maybe it's time to have a fresh look at the RTP spec and write up a short document that says what of this stuff actually makes sense when your only purpose is to put some framing into the datagrams that are offered by Quick, right? What makes sense, and you can ignore the following sections, and then comes a long list starting with congestion control, and good riddance to that, as you all know from my viewpoint. So and the same thing potentially with the payload formats, right? There's also potentially areas in there that don't make sense, and the same thing also potentially for the SRTP and the security profiles. So maybe it makes sense to start there and create this RTP Lite that I wanted to have. You know, throw away all this multicast support. I wanted to do that 20 years ago. Maybe it's time to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. See, Mo?
Mozanetti, one final point on the SRTP, the SAVPF thing. Regardless of the protocol and the need, implementation-wise, it actually may be easier to always go with a library that's tightly bound with RTP and SRTP, because almost everybody is going to have that already. And it may be actually more work to unbind them and figure out how to wedge in your own extraction of just the RTP layer and put SRTP much later somewhere else.
Yeah, thank you, Mo. I'm going to call on James in just a second, but I did want to say there is architectural work to be done here. And so trying to think about this one protocol at a time when you're relying on Quick and you're relying on, let's say, RMCAT, or maybe even asking for help from ICCRG and things like that, that there actually is some architectural work to do there, whether that ends up in any document or not. James.
Thank you, Spencer, for working on this. I see a huge amount of value in maybe even making, in a more generic way, all of the payload formats. It doesn't mean we need to go through and retroactively handle all of the payload formats that have ever existed, but definitely a way to decouple RTP payload formats from RTP itself, so that it could be used in other transport protocols in the future, would be very interesting, and I think would add an awful lot of value to this work and like lots of other work elsewhere.
Cool. Thank you. I think I'm hearing a suggestion, not necessarily just from James, but from these questions, about whether we're talking about a document like the one that Stefan described, which basically profiles and says, if you're doing this over Quick, here's what here's what you should do, here's what you should get from someplace else, and things like that. because I've got other issues about am I doing feedback from RTCP, from Quick, or from something that's not either one of those, or for both. I don't think I've listed that possibility. So yeah, this has been very helpful, and I feel good about only putting up a slide for one issue. Thank you. How close am I to being over time?
Rather, but we have lots of time. It's okay.
Well, oh.
I mean,
I've only got one slide. Okay, you put up the what happens next.
Yeah. So you do the what happens next. And then I think we're...
Yeah. Is this a? You're telling me I should have done 2 slides. Okay.
Probably.
Okay. Yeah. But I'm going to hold, like I say, as I said previously, collecting answers and collecting questions from various places, and then working on answers to the questions and updating the SDP draft. It sounds like either what I or other people, or I and other people would be doing, would be starting to think about the RTP profile for RTP over Quick. Did I get that wrong?
No.
Hi, Stefan.
I start wondering. We have actually, and I think reasonably mature thing there from Jörg and his student over there, right? For RTP over Quick. That thing describes what's on the wire, right? It should probably add a little bit, a few sections. The following parts of the of RFC 3550 are irrelevant. Don't read them, ignore them. If your library has them, comment them out. And then comes the long list. And then we're already done. I think maybe that's, I don't know, what is going on with that draft?
They didn't have anything to say about it this cycle, but I think they said they'd hope to have something again by the next one. So
yeah,
okay.
Well, I have to talk to Jörg about that.
Jörg said in the chat that it's active. So
yeah. What I thought was going on was basically that they had done their version 1 or version whatever it is of their draft, and it had been focused more on the performance, and performance results of running over Quick with 2 different congestion controllers active. And so I think they've been focused on that at least some of our time.
They are academics. They have to write papers, and so yeah. But still, I think rather than having yet another draft that ultimately will have to be merged into it, I think we should just talk to Jörg at some point and see whether we can do something there.
Cool.
Bernard?
Just had one comment, which is that I think Jörg's draft is focused on quick datagrams. Most of what I'm seeing out there in the wild is actually using a quick stream per message, so that they are avoiding the MAC mechanism. So that is one thing I think that is not covered by that draft.
And the sense that I have from talking to people here and in previous versions of places like here is that there are reasons to do streams and there are reasons to do datagrams, and it's not like we have to fight over which one to put in. We just have to describe both of them.
Right.
Don't want to jump the queue, but it's actually a very good reason to do both in the same system, right?
Yeah.
Whenever you have layering, you want datagrams for the enhancement layers and possible the stream for the base.
Cool. Sounds like we're getting closer to doing the right thing. That always makes me happy.
Hope so.
Anybody else?
I don't. Just that Jörg just comments in the chat that his draft is active, and when you said that he's just only doing datagrams and not streams, he said not yet. Smiley. So it sounds like Jörg is continuing to work on his draft, so that's good. And hopefully,
excellent.
Going forward, we'll have more to talk about.
Excellent. Thank you, and I think that's everything that I know on Friday morning. Thank you all for your help.
All right. Next up is Cullen with Game Moves.
Okay. Wow, I didn't realize we're at this point already. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking a little bit about here is taking, and I'm getting quite a bit of feedback from the room. I don't know if there's a way to reduce the mic gain or something, but I'm going to be talking about the idea of taking some data around game moves and game state and putting them into RTP. So next slide, please.
Does that help on does that help on the feedback? I think my Meetup client hadn't gotten unmuted. So
okay,
it's better now.
I'll keep talking. Yeah, it's way better. Thank you. So
good. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. Okay, so goals here is more and more we're getting large systems where people are doing these multiplayer games or applications like metaverse type things that you hear, some of these other systems where you're trying to take the state of game objects or the state of user interface things and circulate them over various things. Obviously, low latency is critical to this. Large scale is, scale out is critical in some applications, not others. And there's many cases where you do want to synchronize it with other audio or video that might have to do with the application or the game. There are some frameworks for doing this out there. There's Unity's UDP, there's NVIDIA's Omniverse, there's others around that you can be used as a third-party service. But when we do measurements of those, they're often have latencies higher, in fact, than the better RTP conferencing systems that we see out there that have, well-designed backbones, multiple POPs around the world, those types of things. So next slide. So the specific use case that I'm concerned about and driving this for is this thing called Webex Hologram. I'm not going to talk about it much, but we're displaying a hologram in a user interface conference, and people are manipulating 3D objects, and we need to pick those up and grab them and move them around. But lots of other people have other use cases, and this is a very similar use case to what we're seeing with a bunch of people are sort of doing 3D meetings with avatars of various forms. Next slide. So a classical piece of data that you want to use from this is, you might think, well, there's nothing in common between these different apps, but it turns out there is an incredible amount in common. There's an incredible number of things where all you want to do is give the location at a particular time and velocity for netcode type usages of a given object. There's also things like a hand. So tons of these AR, VR systems come up with a hand controller in them, and Microsoft makes this mixed reality toolkit that's used in tons of the headsets, not just Microsoft's, but everybody's headsets. It's a very popular open source library, and it encodes the joint angles in the hands. And even people who don't use this library end up inevitably encoding the joint angles in the hands, which are more or less fixed by the autonomy, the anatomy, the bones in our hands. So that's a common thing, for example. And so what we're proposing here is like one of the objects that you can send inside these RTP packets is the geometry of your hand bones and the rate of change of them. So you can send them to the far side. The far side can show the hand, can interpolate the hand forward in motion in time a little bit, so you don't have to send these instantly. So you have some delay, and send to the other side. Next slide. Okay, so what the solution looks like is, this is a schema-based encoding where you know the schema ahead of time. It's not like something like JSON where you can pull it out all and things, because you only use it in ways where you know what the objects are and understand them. It's extensible with tag-length values. It's binary encoded. It's very much designed to allow people to make it easily extensible, to build their own objects and register them and use them for whatever use cases they have. And it's also, it's really hard to keep your train of thought when you're hearing yourself talk with the echo. My apologies.
Miniko is coming.
Binary based, it's pretty much a cut. Yeah, I saw that. Thanks in the chat. So that's the general form of the solution. Next slide. The current draft. Look, it needs I wrote this draft to give you enough of a flavor to understand what it is. You could probably implement it from this. There's lots of the normal stuff that you need as, the framework templates for fully specifying, for all the IANA registries and stuff. That's all missing, but you know how we do that, okay? The gist of what this structure would really be is largely in there. There's an open source implementation people can go play with if they want. We have some people using this. It's still very early stage, but that's where it is today. And my last slide. So what I would like to move this forward somewhere, and I need to move it forward relatively quickly. This isn't a 5-year plan. I mean, there's a lot of people trying to work on how they can standardize various things and make things interoperable between various versions of what somebody might be in a metaverse or games or all of these things. If this is the right place to do it, it's great. I don't think it slows down in any way any other ongoing work going on this working group or anything like this. It's probably largely a slightly different set of people that are interested in it, but does take some expertise in the review of how this fits on top of RTP and all of those types of things. So I don't want to be, here a year from now still asking whether this is the right place to do it. I'd rather just get if you think if you really wish this would go away and never come back, please tell me. Or if we want to do it, please tell me. I don't even care. I just want to have a concrete way to move forward. So with that, let me stop, take any questions about it, and then about what we should do with it and how we should go forward from here. Thanks. So Stefan, looks like you're first on the queue.
Stefan Wenger, are you aware what's going on in MPEG with the haptics stuff?
Yeah, I've been watching that a little bit. It seems somewhat related, but I may not know enough about it. Maybe some of that interface with this. I think some of that is quite different, and it's really focused on the input of controllers more than the state of objects in a game, where there might be multiple different ones with a completely different list of factors in it. But it's definitely related.
Yeah. So my general observation is that while the IETF had isolated examples where it did good work on what I would call a codec, it also had examples where they didn't do good work there. And this looks, at least in part, a little bit like a codec or a representation. There's also stuff going on over in what these graphics guys, what are they called? Well, it will come back in a second, where Intel and NVIDIA and those guys hang out and play. So there are activities going on in this field. This is not classic protocol design. So
I mean, it is pretty classic protocol design. I mean, it's certainly going on lots of different places, but I mean, and it is definitely a codec for game state. No question about it. You're right.
So think about whether you want to go into a protocol group with such a project, or rather go somewhere else with it.
I am.
Suas?
I'm coming from an implementation experience on this one, and trying to see why something like the RTP would make sense, and trying to provide an explanation. If it does not make sense, I'm happy with that. But one thing we've seen is that most of these game moves need to they tie very closely in terms of synchronization with the audio and video that's happening as part of the game, or as part of the the omniverse kind of, or the multiverse kind of things. And RTP kind of provides that time synchronization point across multiple streams that's happening naturally. And having this along the same lines of audio and video as another data stream would naturally fit in there. And that might be one reason why I would think it's in the scope of AVTCORE. But I think it's for the group to decide. But that would be my consideration, my view on this one.
Sergio?
Hi, hello. So I definitely think that having this kind of protocol specifies is a good thing. I mean, I'm completely okay with trying to move this forward, but I'm not sure if this should be something that it is carried over RTP, or if we could do it in data channels. Because, for example, if you are then integrated into WebRTC, it will require us to expose a lot of APIs for all the different protocols in the browser's API in order to use it. So I'm not sure if you have thought of defining something that it is data channel based, for example, similar to what the T140 has done to specify the T140 over data channels. Because, for example, this is something that I have been also considering to do for sending live captioning with WebBTT over data channels. Obviously, there is the issue about how to synchronize the data channels and the RTP data. But I think that if we could, or some of this is information we need to it has to be real time and not, or for example, game moves, they don't have to be synchronized with the video because they have to be processed and consumed as soon as they are received. So they don't really require much synchronization with the video. But obviously, it's just thinking about if what do you think about sending this in data channels instead of RTP? But the idea of having something specified for this space is a very good idea.
I mean, I had thought a little bit about the issue of how this maps into browsers, and I actually hadn't been like, okay, well, this will probably gateway over data channels or whatever, however we do RTP over web transports type thing was my thinking. But the problem with just directly using data channels is that most of large distribution systems that scale out these whole networks that give you the whole latency, like a low latency worldwide, they're not, the most of them are not using WebRTC around it. They're gatewaying from WebRTC to classic RTP, moving it around in RTP, and then maybe it's WebRTC out the far end again. So, I mean, that'd be true of, WebEx, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, list goes on. I realize there's ones that aren't like that, but so that wasn't a really very good deployability option just because the build out of the RTP architecture, I wanted to be able to leverage that. And I couldn't leverage that if I put it over data channels. Though I definitely was concerned about like, well, what does this mean for a client running on a browser? Though many of the many things that run on a browser, an implementation of a game that runs on a browser that you can join from a browser and you can join another way probably have gatewaying of different protocols in the back anyway. So I imagine that probably wouldn't be that big a deal. But that sort of, my thought was a combination between that and web transport.
All right, Jonathan Lennox, I guess mostly as an individual. I feel like this group, we have the expertise to do things like, okay, this is how you get it there, reliably and synchronized with audio and video and, all that good stuff. I don't feel like we have a lot of expertise in knowing this is the correct description of the object state and the game moves and all that. And so my inclination would be to say, I mean, if there's another venue that can say, this is the information we want to send, and then this group would say, this is how you send it, sort of very much in the classic codec versus payload format split, that would probably be the cleanest, the sort of the best use of this group's expertise. Like I said, I don't feel like I mean, if you can get people who have that expertise and have them come here, I guess it's as good as anything else. You can provide a forum, but I don't really feel like this is our classic expertise. So if there were somewhere else that could give that, that could define the codec, if you will, that would make me more comfortable. But if that doesn't exist, we probably could provide a forum if we had to.
So, John, I'm going to reply to this a little bit. At some level, I 100% agree with you, right? But just to follow what it's like to bring new work to the IETF, of course, right? I requested time in the dispatch working group to talk about that issue and see where we should dispatch this codec work. And they're like, no, we're not even going to give you agenda time. This is in the scope of AVTCORE. And I'm just like, okay, that doesn't quite make sense, but okay. But the reality is there's nowhere at IETF that does have that. And we have as good a luck bringing it to a group that happens to have an email list called AVT as any other email list. What we're going to be able to do to bring that in or out doesn't change in any way. I hear you. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, if we
but
can
I feel a little bit like, bring me a rock is the standard answer at IETF.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so Rowan's comment is if you can get the domain experts here who know this stuff and they can do good review, then I guess we can do it. But I want to make sure that I personally would not have the expertise to know whether what we're doing, whether the descriptions of game moves is correct or not. So
yeah, fair.
Mo?
Mosinati, I agree with Stefan and Jonathan that there definitely needs to be a split between the elementary stream, and that should hopefully be defined first, and then the RTP payload format for it. But I think that the hope I think was that this was simple enough and generic enough that it didn't need an entire working group or other SDO for the codec piece. That we're not trying to define a very bit tight codec of large volume data. If we're trying to describe entire worlds, absolutely this should go to some other SDO that's creating world point cloud compression and things like that. But I think the hope here is that this is something simple that's conveying low rate data, low volume data, not describing entire worlds, but just a few vertices. Can we do something like that simply in a generic RTP payload format without a really big elementary stream codec document in another SDO? I think that's the hope here. And if people are on board with doing something simple like that, I think it'd be a relatively quick effort. And if somebody wants something much more complex, they're welcome to go to, MPEG or AO Media or somewhere else who have active bodies working on things like this, like world descriptions, 3D world descriptions and things like that. I don't think that's what this draft is asking for, anything that complex.
Bernard?
Yeah, I think one argument for doing it in AVT core is I've been besieged by questions about exactly this kind of thing, Cullen. And people wanted to do it over RTP because of the timing and everything. The next question they said is, I can't do it in WebRTC, so I have to use the data channel. I don't really want to, but that's all that's available to me. So the kind of people who are doing this stuff, they are interested in WebRTC and they are interested in RTP. So if, it's worth a try to get them in here, because otherwise they're just going to bother me. And I'd rather have them come here and talk to a bunch of other people and just continually, ask me why this isn't supported well in WebRTC. So give it a try. You can always, failure is always an option, but I can't think of any place better. Like I can't think of any place where I would tell those people to go that's better than here. Let me put it that way.
So, Stefan Wenger, I have two things that are replies. One is to Sergio about you have to send the stuff as quickly as you can, potentially unsynchronized. In Tencent, where I work now, is a pretty big game company, right? And we look into this type of stuff a little bit also. And as soon as you're getting away from the most trivial proof of concept implementations, time synchronization is perhaps the most critical and the most important part of the whole story. Yeah, and not only for multi-user games, for everything. So a protocol that has an inherent understanding of time is required there, and that suggests to me that RTP is actually the right transport. Never mind where that payload is defined. So, and the other was regarding to those folks who say, let's do something quick and dirty here. I'm not objecting, but quick and dirty projects have a tendency to mushroom out of first in the IETF, nothing is quick. That's number one, right? I remember when WebRTC was booted. Yeah, let's do that. In a year we have it, right? And 10 years later we had it finally. The IETF is the wrong organization to do something quick. That's number one. But even if it were a good organization, there will be always those guys who strive for perfection and add use cases, and that whole thing will mushroom out of control in an organization that's really not that well prepared to deal with it, right? And so unless you have a group of companies, a group of organization, a core group who goes hell-bent in exactly one direction without leaving everyone else behind, like the Opus guys did, right? When you have that and you can keep it focused, maybe. But as a single company thing, I wouldn't suggest to do this here. I really wouldn't. And you know, if you do it, have a BOF, have a working group. Just do it. That will not take that much more time. Thank you.
Colin, I see you asking to share slides. Are you trying to speak, or are you?
I'm trying to speak and I can't figure out which button to press.
Okay.
So I think sort of being slightly flippant, following on from Stefan's comment, you can have fast or you can have consensus based and pick one. But I think what I came out to say, I think Jonathan has this right. If we can bring the domain experts that understand the data model into this group, then I think AVT Core is an entirely reasonable place to do this work. And this seems like something which is perfectly reasonable to do over RTP, and it seems to me no more complex than some of the other formats we've done. And I think looking back to some of the MIDI payload formats or some of the conversational media for hearing impaired users, for example, they were both a little bit outside the core expertise of the group, and we brought in people who understood those formats, and we defined how they work over RTP. And I think we can do the same here. So this seems like a perfectly reasonable home for the work. And I would suggest whatever you do, don't do a BOF, because you'll be stuck for a decade if you do.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And look, I will try and bring that together, but like realize that a large portion of the use cases from this, what they need to send is a single location and the rate of change of the location and the object ID. That is like the 90% use case. So, I mean, we can understand that pretty easily, but I mean, like, I get everybody's point on bringing in the experts. The problem is unless you start something, this is one of those ones where like, why would they come here? Like, unless we're doing something in this space, they're not going to come. This is one of those, chicken and egg problems on getting new work moving forward. As Ted put it, I mean, it's going to be a little dirty. That's fine.
Suas, you keep going in and out of the queue. Did you want to talk, or are you being indecisive?
Just trying to try some controls here. But one thing I really wanted to say here is that going back to Mo's point, if you're asking something as simple as some kind of a TLV based values, and we want to leverage what RTP provides for and payload, that's defined somehow, but it provides all those machinations to kind of synchronize in a way with other streams that are going with RTP. I strongly think it should be taken by AVT Core, and on exactly what goes in that. It's like sending text over RTP, right? It does not really need a lot of expertise to come and figure out what goes in the text. If it helps, I would suggest that the draft should basically say what this does not do, to kind of not have the kind of the boil the entire ocean kind of thing, and be very specific on what's doing, and have at least a way to come and present what is actually stored, what's actually being sent. That way it might be much easier for people to just thinking of, instead of thinking of the game moves and everything about the game, we're not talking about everything about the game, but we're just talking about these three things, and that way it might make the entire group to decide this does not require that much of expertise. So probably that's one thing I would provide as a feedback to Colin.
Magnus?
Magnus Westland. Yeah, sorry, Colin, I think my comment was, I just comment on the dispatch list about its suitability for RTP, and I should have said that, yes, the format question probably should have been dispatched. But yeah, it still remains this question: what's the most appropriate when you're here, etc. And I think anything here it's going to require some rechartering somewhere. Anyway,
well, I don't think this requires any rechartering in AVT to do this. It's much less of an issue than many other things we've done in here. So.
Okay.
No, I mean, look, you know this charter better than anyone.
I might have written it, but I've probably forgotten it.
That's fair too. But I mean, like, yeah.
This is Spencer Dawkins, and I may be wrong about this, but it sounds like we're trying to figure out where is the right place to send something to figure out where the right place to send it is. And that's not a recipe for IETF wins. Also, it's not a problem that AVT Core can solve, but it's not a recipe for IETF win.
Well, I mean, the way we got the real-time text people to come and participate is by saying we were doing it and putting a straw man on the table, right? And they did not give us the time of day until we did that, right? And then we ended up with some protocols out of that, which are now mandated by law in some places. So, I mean, you know, it's one of these things, like, it's really easy to just say, I mean, it's really hard to figure out how you bring new work forward. I guess one thing that I will say about this is the odds of this, you know, failure is an option here. The odds of this causing any harm to the internet is absolutely zero, right? This is not, you know, this isn't going to break our architecture. This isn't, you know, it's not the spin bit, God forbid. You know, it's a pretty simple thing. We could do something. No one cares whether the draft was marked experimental, informational, BCP, whatever, right? It's just like, hey, is there going to be some work happening? None of these people care in the slightest what the status level is. You know, is there a way to move it forward? And I mean, we could have had this discussion in dispatch, but it would have been the same people at the mic saying the same thing. And yeah, we all wish we could get a whole bunch of the experts in here to do it. But I guess the question is, how are we going to get to that? And you know, if the answer is go form a bunch of group of companies together, this is not going to happen at IETF. It's going to happen in external consortium.
Sergio?
Yep. I think that there are two different aspects of this proposal. One is to define a protocol to carry this game data or synchronization or whatever we want, and then how to transfer that data over RTP. Obviously, the transferring data over RTP is something that it is within this charter. I'm not sure if it is in just defining the protocol itself is within this charter or not, but it is something that it would be interesting for me for other protocols, because it seems that there is no real very good place to do it everywhere else. So, and I think that it would be good if we could define the two things. Also, a protocol that we could use not only in RTP but in other transports. For example, I want to say quick to name one, and then define also how to transport that in a synchronized way with other RTP data.
Colin?
I have to say I'm struggling to see why this is controversial. You know, if we're going to do this over RTP, it's an RTP payload format, which is what this group does. We need the people with the domain expertise, but yeah, that is the same for every other codec or every other payload format we've done in the history of this group over the last 20, 25 years. As Cullen says, there is no architectural harm if we get this wrong. It's just yet another payload format that people don't use. So this seems straightforward.
All right, it sounds like there is at least rough consensus this would be in scope of this group. Are we at the point where we'd actually want to do a call for adoption, or we want to just say we're open to it and Cullen should iterate something which he thinks is the, you know, that you think would be a good thing to call for adoption? Bernard, you want to go first?
Yeah, I don't. Call for adoption might be useful because it is basically you can maybe trying to get the people who would work on it to come and actually answer the call for adoption. You could say, hey, there's a call for adoption. What do you think? So it's a way of getting input.
Fair enough.
So Stefan Wenger, the classic question at this point in most working groups is how many people have read the draft? Let's
fair.
ask that.
How many people? Okay, fair enough. How many have you? Oh, let's see. Can I do a? All right, I'll do a poll. Oh, we're getting, yeah, that's pretty impressive for this group. Yeah.
That's more than most our working group drafts.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a good sign. So yeah, so that's a good sign to us.
Input and is thinking about getting more people involved would be a nice way to get adopted, and also it provides authors a kind of a way to clear direction to move forward as well.
Mosinati, I think Stefan, would be very interesting and useful if you could get someone at Tencent to get feedback about the call for adoption. If a game company is not interested in this, it would be interesting to know why not and what other venues they would prefer to work in. Yes, agreed. MPEG for very large, complex things, but for something simple, just like, hand or head locations.
All right, so it sounds like probably Bernard and I should do a call for adoption on this, because it sounds like people do think it's in scope for the group and useful to do.
Okay, and thank you. And look, also on my last slide was like looking for input, co-authors, work with other things. Obviously, trying to build a community around this. So anything you can do to help point people this direction and connect me up with people, that's what we want to do.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we could do is we could have the call for adoption a little bit longer than usual, and then have people forward it to places that might be of interest. I have no idea what those are, but we can figure it out.
Sounds good.
All right. And now we have 1 minute to talk about short tags. I guess short time for short tags. I don't think it's likely to happen, but no, sorry, but
I'll send the stuff on shorts tag to the list, and maybe we can have another call on that at some point. I mean, actually, maybe would it? I guess the only question here: would there be a group of people interested in having a little, not even an intern meeting, but a phone call sometime on short tags going forward?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but yeah, it's also Magnus. If you could forward the link to that paper you wrote about why just doing short GCM is not good, that would be helpful. All right. Yeah. Okay. So thank you, everybody. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, we need to do something other than just something that isn't broken by Magnus's draft, but presumably there's other cryptography we could do. So. Cullen sent the link to that in the chat. Probably we should also send it to the mailing list so it's okay. So I guess probably Bernard and I should try to arrange a short tags call or interim or whatever, however we want to do it. We'll figure that out.
Yeah.
Bernard?
Yeah, I think we'll take that to the list, and
Okay,
we're almost out of time, I think.
We are back out of time. So thank you, everybody. And we'll figure out if we need to do any interims, or we'll see you in Philadelphia. And everybody have a good rest of the IETF, such as it is.
Bye.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And And Stefan, you'll send send us the minutes?
I am in the process.
Wonderful.
On the way.
Great, thank you.
So it was just to continue from the group that's been driving the box. Just trying to summarize it.
AOM looks like and you guys are from the beginning. I don't know whether
Now the reading
But those they're gonna come up with big specs, big complex things, not
no AOM not
10 vertices.
They have the history of starting with ugly, dirty, and little, and then grow if there's any. If you look, I mean, I go there all the time. I sit on the board there. This is.
I mean, there are.
It's a different environment like this.